I always love it when I get so carried away in the music I can't remember what I'm talking about. We have been focused for the last few weeks on, maybe we could call it living God, embodying the presence that we are, the consciousness, as this author puts it, Paul Smith, and bringing then that to the world as the light to the world. And he breaks the process down into 4 levels of consciousness. In the first week, we talked about basic consciousness, which is the consciousness that allows us to function in the world. And that same week, we also then introduced the awakening process, awakened consciousness, where something happens in our life. It can be a progression or can something be suddenly, where we realize that there's something more than just us at play in our lives. Then Sue last week did a beautiful job with transcendent consciousness, where we begin to move into living that consciousness, the process of embodying it, and the power that then comes with that to bring peace, to bring a quality of freedom into our lives and to the lives of others. This week, we take it a step further into something that he calls everybody consciousness or oneness. Or you may also be hearing a buzzword being thrown out there, non-duality. Lots of teachers out there are saying they're non-dual teachers, meaning that they are teaching oneness consciousness. But what does it mean? What does it mean that when we throw around this term oneness or non-dual? I think Paul Smith does a nice job of describing it in this quote. In this all-encompassing way of viewing the world, we see and feel that everything is connected. There's no separation between us and God, us and one another, us and the physical world. We perceive that ultimately there is no duality or two-ness, only oneness. And so we get the sense of that, right? That somehow there are no boundaries between us. For me, so often the examples that are given of this are so dramatic. You know, even in the book, I think Paul Smith falls into the trap of sharing these very dramatic examples. So for me, I've questioned whether I've ever really had a oneness experience, because, I expect to look at a tree and suddenly I'm a tree, or that it takes your breath away kind of thing. But so I went into this talk, with a lot of, really, couldn't Sue have done this talk? Do I know anything about this? And then I spent some time with my teacher and some other wise souls in this congregation and came to realize that for me it's been a much more gradual experience. And I think for most of us, it's a gradual, maybe not knock your socks off experience, and something that catches your attention, but not like you become one with a tree. I think a good example that I heard this week is through the process of falling in love. It's not that this is actually oneness, this is an approximation of oneness, but this will give you a sense of what oneness is like. All of us, through our childhood, have put up boundaries around who we are out of disappointments, hurts, traumas. And in that, we have this sense of separation until love descends. Love has as one of its main qualities the dissolving of boundaries. It softens, even dissolves them for the moment. And so when we are new in a relationship and we're feeling, what is that word again? I never can remember it. Infatuation. Must be dead for me or something. When we're feeling infatuation, right? And there's all the energy and the passion that's added on to love, right? Then suddenly that person becomes it. We have nothing we need to hold back from that person. And we're separate from that person, but we don't feel any need to put up any boundaries. And it takes our breath away. We want to be with them. We have trouble thinking about anything else but them. And we often attribute that to the other person. But when you pause and sense into it, you're having an experience of not needing to be separate, not needing to maneuver through life. You're free in that moment, free just to be. We say it's an approximation because while love has come in and dissolved your boundaries, it has not taken away the underlying hurts, disappointments, that what we call our wounding in spiritual terms. And then what happens is inevitably the other person begins to tap on those keys, right? Through their behavior. And pretty soon, the magic of those early days of being in love begins to fade, and we again re-separate. The boundaries begin to come up again. And we then work through the relationship in a more usual way, in our more familiar way of being. So what we're interested in spiritually is not like, it could be exhausting, right? Just jumping from one new relationship to another so you could experience a sense of oneness. In spirituality, we're looking at how do you have a lasting experience of that? How do you embody it? How does it become stationed in you? And so for that, Jesus gives us some insight. In the book of Thomas, there were a bunch of people in Jesus' time that was saying that the realm of God was outside of us, that you could see it in the world around, but it wasn't something inside. And Jesus came out and said, no, it is both an inner and an outer experience, and that we come to settle in the realm which the author of the book, Paul Smith, says is oneness consciousness when we're willing to get to know ourselves, our true self. And that language is fine, but I wish that Jesus had said, get to know what you are. Because so often, aren't you all sitting out there kind of going, well, I know what I am, right? Because we all know our personality. We all know all this array of beliefs that we have taken on that have become the structure of our ego, that we kind of call ourselves. That this is what I do, this is what I don't do, this is what I like, what I don't like. This becomes knowing ourselves from the standpoint of the ego. But what are you at a fundamental question? It's, to me, a much more powerful question. What am I? How is it that I have all this potential of spirit? What do I not know about myself? To discover what we are is really a twofold process. At least in Unity, we treat it as a twofold process. One, we encourage you to take on a daily practice of prayer and meditation. Because you see, prayer and meditation invites us to begin to separate from the constant chatter that we take ourselves to be. It actually begins to build a sense of space in our consciousness. And in that space, we don't simply have the option of reacting to life, but we can observe life. We can hold our reactivity for a moment or two and choose what we're going to do. But most importantly, we can get curious about, why am I reacting? What's happening here? What's going on? which leads us beautifully then to the next phase of our spiritual growth. Is once we can see it, once we can get some space from it, then to get curious about what's going on and to go as deeply as we can into that, to be with the hurt, the wound, the trauma, like no one was ever able to be before. And the most amazing thing happens when we're willing to go to that place with ourselves. Inevitably, we land in a place of relaxation. It's like watching a child. When you've come with them and been with them in a real way, the hurt eventually passes and they become themselves again. And as we pay attention to that relaxation, which is quite satisfying, we may notice that we're no longer contained by the boundary of our body. We feel bigger than our body. That can be the experience maybe of moving out into your soul, because your soul is so much larger than your body. And as you clear and more stuff out, and you sense in, suddenly there's no sense of any edge to you. And we call that boundless, that you are suddenly everywhere. And an interesting thing happens in the boundless dimensions. Often, the first one that arises is divine love. And here we are again, back at love. And remember that love dissolves boundaries. So you've been working on helping your system relax through different hurts and different traumas, but all of a sudden, you're immersed in divine love, which takes over for you, helps you out, knocks over a few more pins. Can you imagine how long it would take if you had to work through every single one of your issues? We were talking lifetimes. But with the service of divine love, then we begin to soften. I really appreciated how my teacher Neil put it. He said that because of this natural process of putting up boundaries and causing ourselves to feel separate, we're cut off from this consciousness, from this presence that is imbued with so much. And we fall then into relating to people, thinking that it is our relationships that gives us true support. And we move into then object relation, where, okay, if you're the source of my support, then I'm going to contort myself into something that's acceptable to you. And the unspoken agreement there is, and then you're going to give me what I want. So there's a couple of important pieces there. One, notice that whenever your reactivity comes up, there is some kind of tension. There's some kind of bringing you back into something familiar. Through your body, you'll feel it. And then, here we do this to ourselves because we're going to get some reward, but what happens when the person doesn't show up the way we want? Right? Anger, frustration, collapse, lashing out. It's very tenuous, and it takes lots of energy. As we move into the boundless, we discover we don't have to be anybody other than being. We don't have to contort ourselves into anybody or anything. We can just be. And we find that not only is there external support coming from all sorts of unexpected people and places, but that there's an inner support that carries us, that holds us, that really is everything that we've wanted. When I was reflecting on this last night, I realized that I actually did sort of have a dramatic experience of this. I do my continuing education, my continuing spiritual education through the Ridwan School, and the way we're organized there is you start with a class. So my class was about 70 people in the beginning. And we would, after 22 years, we're not 70 people anymore. But in the beginning, when you showed up, we meet for weekends, and you show up for a weekend, there'd be 35 or 40 people gathered outside of the school, and you become quite close, right? You've heard each other process, you've had compassion for each other. There's a closeness like I hadn't experienced before. But in my particular upbringing, a group of people was dangerous. That it was in a group of people that I often got teased or shamed, that it was easier for me when I approached a small group that I knew and I could trust. So I might say hello to a couple of people on the edge of the crowd or something, but I would then make my way inside. And I was aware that what was going on in the tension, but wasn't really willing to confront it. I'm just going to go upstairs and feel good about myself, right? Until one day, when I approached the group, and I felt so much love for the group. And I went through, and I feel like I interact with all 40 people. And remember, in oneness, you don't become them, you're still separate. And you don't lose yourself completely. So there's discernment, because there's a few people in our group I realized probably didn't want to hug me, although I hugged everybody else, right? And I was, it was like a childlike joy was up in me. It was as if the child in me that had always been suppressed and, don't show your love because, boys don't supposed to do that. All that was up, and I'm having just a grand old time. Sue said last week, it's as if our history dissolves. I had no fear. Our boundaries are based in fear. Like, something's going to happen to me here. I had no fear. And I went upstairs with everybody. I probably was the last one to go upstairs that day. I needed to interact with everybody. Bubbling over with joy. I'm going to look at my notes because my mind is completely empty right now. How is it that we can experience oneness? It's because what we teach in unity, we say, one of our basic unity teachings is there's only one presence and one power in the universe and in my life, God, the good. And Paul Smith is using the word consciousness instead of presence. There's only one presence in all the universe. Only one. And so while in our separate state we feel cut off from that, when we're willing to do our work, when we're willing to go down and get to the very source of what causes us on an unconscious level to say, I'm putting up a boundary when this happens or when that happens, and there can be thousands of those little boundaries, and we begin to soften them, we begin to open to the consciousness that is our nature, but not just our nature. It's everyone's nature, and it is God. You are not only one with God, you are a living expression of the same stuff that we call God. Jesus said, the Father and I are one. He didn't mean that he was God. It's that we are the same presence. We are the same consciousness. And you see that consciousness is imbued with amazing potential. Consciousness is, and so we then open up to the light that we are. And Paul Smith, he's such a character. I think he falls into the same trap as so many traditions. He talks about oneness consciousness. It's the end. You've reached it. No, it's just the beginning. Because you see, if at this point where you've come to trust that you no longer have to put your guard up, which is, I'm not stationed there. My guard comes up. But a lot of times, I'm just boundless. And from that place, we come to realize that we don't need to be separate. And it opens us up to dimension after dimension after dimension. In the Ridwan School, they say it's like getting on a space cruiser. So we've had quite a ride this summer, haven't we? We started out talking about God as infinite being. Or in unity, we say God is principle, something that you can really hold on to. There's something out there that's looking out for this universe. And then we moved on into the fact that you can have a personal relationship with this thing that we call God. You can tell it your problems. You can ask it questions. It's responsive. And often we personalize it at that stage. We make it into a person. Okay. But also, you are the expression of this thing that we call God. And as such, your life is amazing mystery. We can point to things about it, but the truth is that we can hardly capture it in words. And so I hope that with the end of this series today that you don't just put it away. I hope it keeps chewing on you, keeps having its way with you. Because this is an opportunity. Yes, it's going to be something you're going to work on for the rest of your life. We are never there. And yet the process is truly amazing. We'll leave it at that. You can begin to prepare your love offerings as we invite this wonderful duet up again to entertain us.